on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. In today's video, we're going to continue on with the ratings videos within Madden 24, and today we're going to talk about specifically defensive linemen and what matters most on the edge and the interior of the defensive line. So it's worth noting that you have to have an understanding of how defensive line operates in real life versus the game, and how that all ties together because they operate differently. They are still operating on somewhat old terminology within the game, with referencing all your defensive linemen as left end, right end, or defensive tackle, when in reality, they're not referenced that way in real life anymore because of the varying systems within the game. You have 3-man D-lines, 4-man D-lines, 5-man D-lines, so it's better classified as edge players and interior players. So you might hear me refer to both types of things within this video just so that you understand up front what we're going to be talking about. First and foremost, let's talk about interior defensive linemen, which is generally going to be listed as your D tackles within the game. Anybody listed as a D tackle is going to be an interior defensive lineman, not an edge player. The reason for that is in pretty much every single system, your D tackle is going to be lined up as a 0 technique, a 1 technique, or a 3 technique, meaning lined up over the centers and the guards, off of their shoulders, in the A and B gaps, not generally outside. You also can't put these players on the depth chart at the rushing defensive end positions, so something worth considering. These guys are always going to be interior guys. Sometimes, depending on your system, your defensive ends, your left end and right end, can be interior defensive linemen. If we took a look at the Steelers, for example, Cameron Hayward is an interior defensive lineman, but he's listed as a right end. Reason being is that in a 3-4 system, all 3 defensive linemen are interior guys, and your outside backers are your edge guys. So presents a little bit of a complication when we talk about things. Just know that this can encompass all of these players when we talk about interior guys. So looking at interior guys, what is actually important for these players? One of the most important things for these players that is very often overlooked by players within the latest Madden games, and this has actually even been the case for a very long time, is the player's athleticism. A lot of times you'll notice that you could get a guy like a Cameron Hayward, for example, that sheds a lot of blocks, but isn't necessarily making those TFLs, tackle for loss, or being as disruptive as you would want them to be in the backfield. Now, that's not saying that that's not going to be useful in and of itself, but you want players here that are explosive enough that when they get off of a block, they can make a play, they can tackle somebody, they can be disruptive in the backfield, and they can even get a sack. And so what you don't want at this position is 70 or below speed. And that's very often what you see with these players. Taking a look at Cameron Hayward, 71 speed in this franchise. This person got Keanu Benton up to a pretty high overall, still only 70 speed. I'm the Rams. When we take a look at our nose tackles, 74, 74, 71 speed. It's not ideal. And I very often, with this franchise specifically, notice my high overall defensive tackles not making the plays that I expect my defensive linemen to make. If you get off of a block and you have a clear shot at somebody, you need to be able to track them down. And that makes a lot of sense when you just compare it against the players that they're going to be tracking down. A lot of the quarterbacks in this game now are going to have good athleticism, and every running back in the game is going to have 90 plus speed. So how can a 70 plus player compete with a 90 plus speed running back, an 80 plus, 90 plus speed quarterback, other than having a speed threshold slider that is going to make them more similar? They just can't. That's just the reality of it. So you have to understand that better athleticism is going to be much more useful at this position. Now, when we talk about athleticism at most positions, we generally talk about agility and change of direction as well. Not as important with these positions. I mean, these guys are not going to have to change direction. They're not very often going to have to do much other than try to split a double team, shed a singular block, and go downhill and make a tackle or make a sack. Pretty straightforward, pretty easy. So with that being said, all we really care about here in terms of athleticism is your speed and your acceleration. Acceleration is going to help these guys get off the ball quicker and get up to that top speed to track a guy down if they do get off of their block. And then your speed is going to, again, be your straight line speed, being able to get from point A to point B. which again, if you're going up against a 90 speed running back, is better if it's higher. Most of the defensive tackles are going to be around that speed, even the top end defensive tackles, but you can find the unique ones that are up closer to 80 and above 80, and that's exactly what you want. You want the Ed Olivers, the Jalen Carters, the Jordan Davises of the world, even Milton Williams here, who have 83, 81, 80 speed. Now, we're going to talk about a lot of other ratings that impact this, but I'm just going to be honest with you guys. It doesn't really help, in my opinion, in my experience, to have guys that can shed blocks, but then can't do anything else. It really doesn't help in Madden to have space eaters. In real life, yeah, for sure, those players are useful. But in here, you need guys that can do more than just get off a block. You need a guy that can actually finish the play. And that's why there are only a handful of guys here that I would even consider bringing into my team to be a starter. And then, like I said, ignore agility and change of direction. It's helpful to have it in very minute circumstances. Not really worth paying much attention to. And then the next most important stat here for these players, maybe even actually more important than the athleticism, is going to be the player's impact blocking. We talked about this with offensive linemen, but if you want a player that's going to get a push at the point of contact, you need to have a player that has high impact blocking. You're going up against offensive linemen that are going to have pretty solid impact blocking, pretty good run blocking, and therefore you want to get an initial push. You want your defensive linemen to not be getting pushed back and giving up free yardage. In fact, you want them to be disruptive in the backfield, even if they can't block shed, and that's what impact blocking is going to do for you. Anything above a 90 is what we're looking for here. Leonard Williams is pretty solid with the 88, but even in the high 80s, oftentimes you can see a player getting pushed more than you would like. So we're looking for 90 plus. The bigger, the better here. Sometimes you can get a center with 95, 99 impact blocking, and so consider the guys that you're going up against here. You want defensive tackles, interior defensive linemen that have high impact blocking. And then beyond that, we're talking about block shedding, we're talking about strength, and we're talking about power moves. That's all we care about on the interior of the defensive line. Don't get me wrong, there are times when a finesse move defensive tackle can be useful, but more often than not, it's more useful to you to just be able to take your controller, flick down on the stick a couple of times, and just bull rush through guys with defensive tackles, especially guys like this that are lacking athleticism. When you try to get into finesse moves and stuff with them, it makes it even more difficult oftentimes for them to track down the quarterback, because they're already slow to begin with. So unless you have a really athletic guy, you're probably going to want to ignore finesse moves. Again, strength 90 plus. Think about the guys that they're going up against. Interior offensive line, bulkier, stronger offensive linemen. You want guys here that can shed blocks. Again, more often than not, you can get sacks off of these guys by just straight up block shedding rather than performing a move. And I know that there's some controversy or discussion over whether block shedding impacts a player's ability to pass rush or not. In my experience, in my friend's experience, yes, your block shedding is going to improve your ability to pass rush. You could have a guy here with 99 power moves or 99 finesse moves, but if they have 70 block shedding, you're going to see significant drop off in their performance. Block shedding helps in the pass game and the running game. You want to have a player here that has 85 plus in block shedding, 85 plus in power moves. Think again of the players you're going up against. Most of the interior offensive linemen you're going up against, even lower ranked players, are going to have 80-ish or better run blocking stats, and that's what we're going up against. Likewise, their pass block power numbers is what you're going up against on the O-line. So most of those players have 80-ish plus pass blocking power. You want power moves that exceed that in order to get positive results. And then one other overlooked stat here that'll impact your performance at these positions is going to be the player's pursuit. And I know a lot of people think about pursuit from linebacker spots, from corner spots, from safety spots, because they have to make open field tackles. They have to diagnose and take angles to the play and chase players down. And that's what pursuit is mostly useful for. But pursuit is really useful for once these players shed their blocks or make a move, being able to track down the quarterback or the running back. And this oftentimes can help make up a little bit for a player's lack of athleticism. And this is oftentimes why you'll still see high-rated players here with low athleticism be able to make some plays that you might not expect them to be able to make. So we're talking about Leonard Williams with 71 speed. Sometimes he'll be able to lock onto a guy much quicker and get there much quicker than what a 71 speed player would really be able to do. He gets drawn into some animations and things like that, and that's because he has a really solid pursuit rating. And this goes for all your defensive line positions. Anybody on defense should have a good pursuit rating. When you sacrifice things like pursuit, when you sacrifice things like block shedding or power moves, then you're going to get a much less effective player on the interior of the defensive line. And I also want you to consider the player's stamina. You're looking for anything 80 or above on the interior. These guys are going to get tired at a faster pace, more than likely in comparison to a lot of other players. But generally at this position, you're going to get a lot of low stamina players. Here's a good example. Quinnen Williams, who we identified as one of the top athletic defensive lineman here, 78 speed, 85 acceleration. That's really good, and he's a 95 in this league now with Superstar, but his stamina is only at an 80. Likewise, we can go down to a player like Keanu Benton, who we identified earlier, whose stamina is only a 75. So if you're playing in a franchise or anything that has any type of fatigue, these players are going to be subbing off the field way more than you would like them to. You don't want a one-down player. You don't want a third and short player. Those players don't really exist as much in the NFL anymore, and you don't really want to have them on your team. Lastly, with interior defensive linemen, I want to quickly look at traits because there's something worth considering here. Your disciplined, undisciplined penalty trait, always worth considering, especially for defensive players. If you don't want them to get penalties, if you don't want them jumping off sides, if you don't want them to get face masks and those types of things, always worth considering. But what I care about more here with these positions is whether they utilize finesse move or utilize power move. So left alone with these players, not controlled by a user, is what I mean. Will they execute finesse moves or power moves on their own? You can always execute a finesse move or a power move utilizing your controller, utilizing the sticks. That's fine, but you're not going to be able to control every single player on the defensive line every single snap. So will they execute finesse moves and will they execute power moves? What's worth considering here is if you're looking at a power rusher D tackle and they only have, I don't know, 65, 70 finesse move, you don't want their finesse move trait to say yes, because you don't want these players using moves that they're not good at. You want them using moves that they're good at. Likewise, you don't want to have a guy that has 95 power moves that has no in the utilizes power moves trait, because again, they're going to be good at it, but then they're never going to execute on those moves. And then it's going to be drawing purely off of block shedding. So you have to consider that. Again, if you get a guy, and this is fine, oftentimes you'll get a guy that just utilizes finesse moves, do not upgrade them as a power rusher. That changes the whole philosophy. You're going to have to upgrade them as a finesse rusher because they'll utilize their finesse moves, but they're not going to use those bull rush moves. And then it's always worth considering whether a player has high motor or not, especially on defense, especially on the D line, as to whether they're going to be consistently performing up to that level that you expect them to perform at. Strip ball can be good if you want a lot of strip sacks. If you do get a good athletic defensive interior lineman, strip ball is going to be really effective. This is more important for edge rushers. It's really good to have strip ball on edge rushers. TJ Watt's a perfect example. Somebody that gets a lot of strip sacks, not just sacks, but forces that ball to come out, puts your offense in a good position because we're recovering fumbles all the time. Having strips ball is really good for edge rushers within just about any Madden. And now let's move on to edge rushers. A lot of the same things are going to be important for these players, but these players play differently, and you have to consider whether they're an outside backer or a defensive end. If we're talking about TJ Watt or Daniil Hunter or Rashawn Gary that are listed as outside backers, they are oftentimes in a 3-4 defense going to have some coverage responsibilities, which is not the case with defensive ends in a 4-3 system. Then again, we have to consider most of what we call nowadays is nickel defense, which is going to be 2 rushing D tackles and 2 rushing D ends. In those scenarios, it's like a 4-3 defense. In terms of the D-line, it's a 4-man D-line at that point, and TJ Watt would be a defensive end in a nickel scheme. He's not going to be dropping back into coverage. So you got to consider what you're actually doing with your defense. Are you calling a lot of 3-4? So does it matter if these guys have coverage capability or not? If it matters to you, then you're just going to want to pay attention to their zone coverage. that's pretty much all that's going to matter for you. You're generally not going to have an outside backer in man coverage scenarios. You don't want to. It's not going to be effective to upgrade them that way. You're never going to get a outside backer with particularly good man coverage skills. But if they have 80 plus zone coverage, they're going to be in a really good position, like TJ Watt here. 86 zone coverage, fantastic. If you're looking for a guy that can drop into coverage, TJ Watt can do. One of the few players in the league, and this is why he's the best defensive player on the planet right now, one of the few players in the league that is the best pass rusher in the league, but also pretty solid at dropping into coverage. Nobody else can really say that they can do that. Very few players can come even close to it. But let's take a look then at what actually matters for these players. Now, a lot of these players are going to be pretty highly inflated because we're a couple of years into this league. But you can get a good picture of what's going to actually matter for some of these players. Generally, athleticism going to matter even more at these positions. In Madden 24 and Madden 23, not as much as it did in the past. Like a couple years ago, you could get away with just running a fast player like Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah here, who has 89 speed, 93 acceleration. You could get away with just rushing them around the edge of the offensive tackle and get a sack straight off the quarterback. You can still do that from time to time now, but it's not quite as effective, and it depends on what sliders you're running. So I don't want you to solely focus on athleticism here, but consider that especially if they're at outside backer, they need to be able to track down running backs. And even at defensive end, these guys need to be able to track down running backs and the like, because they're holding contain. And that concept of contain is very, very important. These guys got to be able to prevent running backs and whoever from getting outside more often than not. A lot of the times these guys are lined up outside of the offensive tackles, and they're tasked with keeping things inside and pressing the play inside, preventing the quarterback from rolling out, preventing the running back from getting to the edge, those types of things. So generally when I look at this position, I'm looking for 86 plus speed. I mean, 85 is okay. We're kind of in like old school linebacker territory, but you're looking for a guy like a Max Crosby, a guy like a Byron Young right here, a guy like Willie Anderson Jr. Those are your prototypical defensive ends. You want that athleticism. It's not a bad thing to have 80 plus, but you're looking for higher the better. Acceleration, far more important at this position than any other, because again, you want these guys to get up to their top speed quickly and be able to track down the quarterback quickly, be able to beat the running back to the point of attack. So even if they're lacking in speed, they can get up to their top speed like that. And you're talking about a guy like Max Crosby, a guy like Byron Young, 93 acceleration here, really, really good. Anything 90 plus is going to be solid for these positions. That's how you know your players in elite territory whenever the Madden devs actually give them like 90 plus acceleration. It's going to be less effective if you have a guy like DeMarcus Lawrence who's 82, 85. Now, where we overlooked agility and change of direction with the interior guys, we are not going to overlook it with edge guys, because these guys do a lot more moving around. They're going to be in open space more. They're going to be tracking down the quarterback more often. A lot of mobile quarterbacks, things like that, the quarterbacks that can roll, quarterbacks that can change direction and whatnot, and you have to be able to compete with that. I'm looking for something agility-wise, 85, 75 Willie Anderson Jr. is a good base here, but you don't want somebody that's in the 60s here, 57, 70, like that's an interior defensive lineman right there. You don't want a player like that on the edge. And then next up, we're taking a look at their finesse moves and their block shedding capabilities. Like I said, these two things are tied hand in hand, but again, on the edge, you're primarily going to be using finesse rushers. These are guys that need to be able to rip, swim, spin, all types of different things, and not just bull rush over the offensive tackle. Whenever you bull rush over an offensive tackle, it gives the quarterback lanes to run. Whereas if you have some of that mobility to rip, spin, and combine moves off of each other, which is what the finesse moves asset is, then you're going to be much more disruptive to the quarterback, which is what you want your defensive ends to be, your edge players to be. So we're not really paying too much attention to power moves, more so paying attention to finesse moves. You want it to be high 80s into the 90s. Again, consider what we're going up against, the players that we're going up against. And then beyond that, we want to take a look at the players' block shedding. Like I said, that's tied into that, because oftentimes, again, you have to hold the edge as these players. A lot of good pass rushers in this game will often have good finesse moves, but pretty poor block shedding. So if we take a look at Will Anderson Jr., for example, who's a really good prototypical athlete, honestly a pretty strong player, a pretty good sized defensive end. He's right now only at 75, and I know this is modified, but 75 block shedding. That's not going to get the job done. You're not going to be getting off any offensive lineman in the run game, and you're not going to be getting any extra animations for block shedding and getting to a sack in the passing game. You want 80 plus as a minimum here. Some players are much better than that even still. And we could talk about some stats that might have, minor effects, such as their tackling capability, not letting guys get away from sacks and tackles and those types of things, as well as their awareness and their play recognition, depending on what you're having them do. I would say awareness and play recognition and tackling are more important for outside backers because they're going to be doing a lot more flowing, a lot more tracking players and figuring out what the play is. If you have a defensive end, more often than not, they're rushing that C gap, they're rushing outside of the tackle, and they're either looking to contain the run or they're looking to pass rush the quarterback. There's not a whole lot of diagnosis that's involved with that, so it's less important for those guys. But what I really want you to then dial in on after you've taken a look at their athleticism and their finesse moves and their block shedding is take a look at their pursuit, their hit power, and their impact blocking. Again, impact blocking, you're going up against O linemen here. You're going up against offensive tackles that are going to have 80 plus impact blocking. You're going to get beat off the ball a lot of the times just simply because Will Anderson Jr. has 77 impact blocking. Hit power, that's going to affect your ability to knock the ball out of the quarterback's hands. So it's really good to have a edge player that has 90 hit power and strips the ball. That's going to create a lot of turnovers, a lot of strip sacks, a lot of fumbles, those types of things that can be really effective for changing possession and setting yourself up for success. Pursuit is the last thing that I really want you to pay attention to. Again, stamina going to matter a little bit for this position. Prefer something closer to the high 80s and 90s. These guys need to be on the field more than your interior guys even do. But pursuit-wise, that's the last thing I really want you to care about because they have to be able to track down the quarterback. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to be able to track down an athletic player that can get moving. And same thing with running backs. You have to be able to track that guy down and prevent them from getting to the edge. And your pursuit is going to change how these guys adjust, how they take angles, how they get to those guys. If you have a really good pass rusher with bad pursuit, you'll often notice that they're going to miss sacks. They're going to miss the quarterback. They're going to let the quarterback or the running back get away from them because they're not taking the best angle or the best route to get that play and finish that play. And that's pretty much all you need to know for these positions. They're pretty straightforward, to be honest with you. It just can get a little bit complicated depending on what defensive system you're running. Nonetheless, though, focus on the ratings that we talked about in this video and you will set yourself up with successful players across the defensive line. As always, I hope you guys enjoyed this video or found it useful, and if you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.